My name is Louise Ryan, and I'm Senior Professor of Sociology here at London Metropolitan University, and I'm also Director of the Global Diversities and Inequalities Research Centre, and today's seminar is part of our regular seminar series. I'm joined as well today by the Deputy Director of the Centre, Dr. Maria Lopez, so we will be here facilitating today's seminar. If I could just do some quick housekeeping regulations before we kick off. So could I ask all participants to please keep their mics on mute, because otherwise we can get a lot of background noise. We are going to have the speaker present for about 45 minutes or so, and there will then be plenty of time for discussion and questions afterwards. So we would ask you to please hold back your questions until the speaker has finished. You can use the chat function for those people who might be unfamiliar with the Collaborate platform. I think we need some people to go on mute because I'm getting quite a lot of feedback. Can you just all make sure you're on mute, please? Yeah, there's quite a lot of feedback. Can everybody please make sure that their microphone is on mute? The person who's just joined, anonymous caller, can you please put your microphone on mute? Thank you. Okay, so you can see now what happens when somebody doesn't keep their microphone on mute. We can get quite a lot of background noise. So thanks for that little demonstration. So you can either type your question in the chat. For those of you who aren't familiar with this platform, if you go down to the little arrows on the right-hand side of your screen in the little purple box and open that, you can see the speech bubble, which is the chat. Or you can also raise your hand at the end, and then I will take the questions in sequence. So I'm now going to hand over to one of our colleagues here at the Research Centre, Antia, who's going to introduce today's seminar and our speaker. Over to you, Antia.
Thank you very much, Louise. It is a pleasure for me to present today Professor Herman Kreutzmann, who is a human geographer with a research focus on development issues and minority groups in the high mountain regions of South and Central Asia, just for those who follow traditional area studies divisions. He held the chair of human geography at the Freie Universität Berlin until March 2020. Previously, he was also the chair of geography, cultural geography and development studies at the Friedrich Alexander University Erlangen in Nuremberg. Professor Kreutzmann has extensively participated in several scientific committees and research projects. I had the opportunity to participate in, to learn, I mean, from him. It has been a very enriching experience as part of my participation in the Crossroads Asia Competence Network. And I learned, above all, what does it mean to do collaborative research. His department at the university often hosted students and scholars from different regions around the world, and students belonging to areas that areas that are the peripheries of large states. I remember to attend some events at the center, and it was possible to find someone speaking Wahi, Burusheski, Sina, and also even Hashi, a language from northeastern India. As we are holding this presentation at the Global Diversities and Inequalities Research Centre at London Metropolitan University, I think it is very important to reflect about the meaning of diversity in terms of knowledge production, about the lack of attention that and resources receive, that some regions receive in terms of research and attention, the lack of language skills which are being lost, and knowledge about the study of minority groups and the understanding of minority societies. Professor Kreutzmann has authored numerous publications. I mean, his research articles focus mainly, among other issues, on livelihoods, on mountain dwellers, issues of water, pastoralism, and environmental issues. But he has also studied conflict-related aspects. He's the author of a number of co-edited volumes, and among his recent books are Hunza Matters, Bordering and Ordering Between Ancient and New Silk Roads, which was published by Harasubis, Harazovic in 2020. This book probably is, I mean, he's in Hunza. If you travel to Hunza and you ask about Kreutzmann, everybody knows him. He's in an institution there, and probably I think is Hunza was the place where he did his PhD, or the project of his PhD. Also, his other books are the Wuhan Quadrangle, Exploration and Espionage During and After the Great Game, and Pamirian Crossroads, Kyrgyz and Wahi of High Asia. Apart from the rich historical part and the geographical part in these volumes, it is quite interesting to reflect about issues, nation building issues in these regions. So given this expertise today, I would like to invite Professor Kreutzmann to talk about the new Silk Road, China-Pakistan Economic Corridor impact. China-Pakistan Economic Corridor's impact on Karakoram communities. Without further ado, I would like to pass the word to Kreutzmann. Thank you.
Thank you, Antje. Can you see my slide? Can you see my slides? Yes. Yeah?
Yes.
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 Yeah. Thank you, Antje. Thank you, Louise, for the kind invitation to speak in your lecture series. And I'm quite happy that I can talk about one topic that is very close to my heart and which is probably very remote for many attendees today. And I would like to draw your attention to one line you can see in the center of this opening map, which is a new road system. And a road in itself would not be that much interesting probably to look at, but what we see here, it is connecting some areas, and it's basically the only modern connection between South Asia and Central Asia, between the old Grand Trunk Road of the British Raj and with the Chinese road system and with the Russian and later on Soviet road system in Central Asia. And this road has some impact and is some part of a story that has a long history and a long tradition of opening up areas for modernization, opening up for colonial penetration, and sometimes what's called pacification as well. So this is a history, and I would like to do a little bit of a historical approach for something that has modern impact since nearly a decade. We talk about the One Belt, One Road project or the new Silk Road, or we talk about one of the side aspects, and that is the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or as we say in Pakistan, the CPEC. And the CPEC is a very important line of this new modern Silk Road, as it connects China with one of the biggest markets, Pakistan and South Asia, and it has some more impact probably than some other lines that go to Central Asia and other directions. So this was announced in 2013 by Xi Jinping in China, and has changed quite a bit in Pakistan. What I would like to do is to draw your attention to the people who are normally not talked about in this connection, about the people living in the remote corners, who live in the mountain areas in between, and to see what kind of impact these projects have had on this area. And it's a long history of trying to penetrate to these areas. In this historical map, probably it's difficult to orientate. You might see Kabul in the left-hand corner. You might see Srinagar, the capital of Kashmir, and you might see Kashgar as a very important hub on the Silk Road. And in the late 19th century, this was an area where a white blank, as Eric Shipton called it, was in between, an area of nowhere, an area which was not colored in the colors of the red of the British Raj or in the yellow, as often in the Chinese circumstances, or in the dark green color of the Russian Empire. It was a white area in between, and somehow these areas were of quite some interest to get hold of Kashgar, or at least to get a foot into Kashgar at that time. But how to reach there and why to reach there is not an easy answer to a question about penetration into such an area. The penetration was coming as an opening up and a kind of a pacification strategy. Algernon Durand called it the making of a frontier in his biography. And you can see from the picture that it was not easy to look behind the mountain wall and see what is in there behind that mountain wall. And there were sitting some small petty chiefs and some principalities that were not very eager to be participating into other exchange relations, and there were some between them. And Algernon Durand, he found the pretext in a quote, and I want to read it to you. His agreement about the ruler of Hunza, Mir Saft Ali Khan was his name. His agreement with us is to abstain from raiding on the Yarkand Road, to exclude foreigners from his state, not to allow Chinese officials to interfere in the internal affairs of Hunza, and to give free passage to British officers. In direct contravention to his engagement, he has received Chinese officials in Hunza, has invited Russian officials to enter, has extorted, blackmailed through his representative in Kashgar under threats of raiding the trade routes, and has called on the Chinese and Russians to aid him against us. This was sufficient to make it a pretext of conquering the area on very difficult roads, basically where no roads were at that time. Even 50 years later, after this conquest, the road was not that much improved. This is what you see on the picture, is the main trade route between India and Chinese Xinjiang region to the Silk Road oasis in 1935, this picture. We have it to do with certain very small kind of principalities by the name of Hunza and Nagar. In the early 19th century, maybe only 20,000 people were living in this area. And the population growth and the size of the growth, as in the map on the bottom, is that the extent has grown in the meantime, but not the population size that much. But Hunza and Nagar were just in between the Chinese realm, which is in the red dots in the map, and the British sphere and the British Kashmiri sphere of influence with the lined shading in the bottom of the map. So they played some role in what it was about to penetrate, to conquer, to control an area, to fend off other competitors and rivals in the area. British administration was introduced in such a way that the rulers of this area were appointees by the British Raj and by the Kashmiri Maharaja. And so all the rulers after the conquest in the late 19th century were appointed by both superpowers of that time. But what did that mean for the exchange relations, for the road infrastructure, for the accessibility of the area? When did modern traffic start, so to speak? There was a major attempt in the early 1930s by a Citroën mission called Croisière Jaune, the Yellow Expedition, a motor expedition Beirut in Lebanon all the way to Beijing, and crossing the mountains and crossing through the Hunza Valley at the same time, which is in the center of this map. This was the most difficult part of this expedition, and even by disassembling the vehicles and carrying them on mule loads and horses, it was not possible to get across this very difficult area. It is really a challenging mountain terrain for motor transport, and they totally failed in the 1930s. They had to give up at this section here. The rulers were nominally ruling an independent state, but their bodyguards were equipped and paid by the British Raj there. So it was a kind of an indirect rule that was applied in this area. And the interest in the area was going even further this time. We have in the 1930s some happening here that the Kashmiri Maharaja leased the Gilgit Agency to the British Raj, and Gilgit became British territory, so to speak, onwards, and was from Gilgit town was controlling the surrounding principalities in the area. It could not have been a kind of a economic affair, because you see in the right diagram probably that the trade between Central Asia and British India completely failed after 1937 because of some inner turmoil within Chinese Turkestan, and it never came up again in great numbers there as well. It was not an economic affair, basically. It was more a strategic location that was important, and a strategic location that had to be supported from Kashmir and from down country, India and Pakistan later on, for the supplies in the area. A remote corner, a very little economic importance, but it got importance during the Second World War. I apologize for this bad map that I showed to you, but it's the only map in a very top secret file in which a clandestine plan was displayed to build a road in the later years of the Second World War from Kashmir, from Gilgit into China, in order to support the Kuomintang under Chiang Kai-shek, to fend off the Japanese troops, and to fend off Mao Zedong and the communists who wanted to take over the control in China. It was a plan that was very clandestinely negotiated. It was just until today, it was never appeared in the historiography that these negotiations took place, but we have documentation on it, how it was planned, and that it was meant or calculated that 1 million man-days would be required to build a road across these mountains to support those troops in China. And the Chinese claimed that they could do this in 6 months, that they would be making the stretch on the Chinese side, and the Britishers were asked to do this in 6 months as well with 1 million man-days. And these 1 million man-days would have required 2/3 of the male population of these mountain communities to participate full-time in this project. Luckily, it was not on the top agenda of the War Office and was never instrumentalized, but it was basically the pre-idea of what has become now the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and which became the Karakoram Highway. The first motor vehicle that reached in Gilgit at all was in 1949. It was after the independence of Pakistan that a jeep track was built into the area, and this jeep track was a very simple affair and not very reliable, and would only be functioning outside of winters and spring because the passes were closed under snow otherwise. In that way, Hunza and Nagar remained more or less independent principalities, enjoyed quite some autonomy in the area, and this autonomy was accepted within the Pakistan state, and the rulers were depicted in the 1950s as very special rulers, exceptional rulers here, who were enjoying a life and promoting their valleys as the valleys of longevity and no crime and peaceful conditions, and that was the promotion that was used here. This would not last forever in the area. On the left side, we see the Hunza state emblem, which has a lion. I don't know if it is the British lion, holding the Hunza state flag, which has symbols of bow and arrow for their bravery, of the moon and Pakistan logo there as well. And what we see on the right side is that the emblem, which is on the palace of today, is missing the lion, and is only the flag is remained in this area, and that has to do with the abolishment of the state in 1974. The small kind of principalities had in the 1950s not a proper road link at all, while today the Karakoram highway is cutting through this area and is the main artery between Central Asia and Pakistan, and is one of the most modern road links that we find in these mountain areas at all. So many things have changed in this area, and this area is at the same time a disputed area in the Kashmir conflict between India and Pakistan. Gilgit-Baltistan is claimed by India, Jammu and Kashmir is claimed by Pakistan. Both countries are claiming basically all of it, what is here. And so the Karakoram highway is avoiding the disputed territory between China and Tajikistan, but is cutting through this disputed area of Gilgit-Baltistan and then leading downwards to Islamabad, to the capital of Pakistan. This was a major project of friendship between Pakistan and China, and it was friendship because they had a common enemy at that time, and it was built as a very important strategic road in this area here as well. The effort was quite big for many years until the opening in 1978. Several Chinese engineers and workers and Pakistani soldiers and workers died in this and became a symbol of a very strong bond between Pakistan and China. And when it was opened, they termed it even as the eighth wonder of the world. That much for the history of how road systems came into this part of the world. If we look now to Kashgar, then we have a completely different situation here. Kashgar is the first special economic zone in China that is not on the coastline. Kashgar was designed to become a commercial and trade hub for Central Asia, for 8 neighboring countries, as they claimed it. And Mao Zedong is now looking from his statue on a trade fair he would never have expected in his lifetime, I guess. The situation of trade and travel has completely changed in this area. And on this map, we can see that we have a road development that connects previous roads and new roads with each other, and they become part of the new Silk Road system of the One Belt and One Road system. On the left, we can see the Pamir Highway that was built in the Soviet period in the 1930s. On the right, we see the long line between Kashgar and Gilgit, which I mentioned before as the Karakoram Highway. And since 2004, we have a small link between these two road systems here. And in the first 10 years, the trade exchange between both countries on this side increased by a factor of 1,000 to more than $2 billion in trade across the system. And now these all are treated as parts of the One Belt, One Road and the China-Pakistan economic corridor system. So this kind of change of exchange possibilities and of exchange relations has changed quite a bit for the people in this area. And they are part of a long-term plan for China-Pakistan economic corridor, a plan that has a vision up to 2030. We have a boost for infrastructure development. Roads, dams for hydroelectrical generation are built in this area. The expectation and the hope is that there is an enormous economic spin-off for Pakistan. More than 55 billion US dollar investments have been taken place on loan basis. The Karakoram Highway was a gift by China, but all these projects are on a loan basis, and in 2 years' time, the repayment period will start, and Pakistan has not that much of the funds to pay back these things, which will create probably another challenge there. It was the hope and the potential for cross-border trade and regional development between Pakistan, China, and other Central Asian countries. And the promise was in this long-term plan that the local communities will profit from this, that we have rural uplift and the welfare would be enhanced. But what we see on the other hand is that the development funds are more or less spent in the down country, in the lowlands of Pakistan, and not that much in the highlands, that the minorities are not participating in any respect in these kind of activities. The remote areas play a secondary role in it, that there's a preferential treatment of investors who come from other parts of Pakistan and China, and the domestic market shares of the local communities is shrinking and dwindling away, and overall it's a growing dependency on goods from China and of expertise from China for all kind of infrastructure projects and all kinds of industries. It's a very high cost Pakistan is paying for this kind of cooperation, and it is very unsecure whether all these investments will ever be recovered. And that has led to an economic crisis in Pakistan, that they to negotiate with the International Monetary Fund for rescheduling their debts, and that Pakistan's dependency on Saudi Arabian kind of financial support has increased in recent years significantly. The plan is in nice Chinese parlance called One Belt. That is the belt between Kashgar and Quadda at the Arabian Sea. 3 passages, these are 3 parallel roads to Pakistan, and 2 axes in the east and in the west, and 5 functional zones. If we look on the northern Pakistan zone, that is where the mountain communities are living, it is basically a border logistic channel. That means it's a thoroughfare for container trucks. It's resource exploration, that means mining under Chinese control is executed in this, and ecological conservation, which means that national parks are introduced in this area for nature protection and so on. It is not really what the people have expected that would come out from this project. The economic impact is vary enormously, but many of those projects that are now labeled as China-Pakistan Economic Corridor projects have been projects that have been initiated earlier on, and they are relabeled now as CPEC projects. Roads, hydroelectric power plants, and the transboundary national parks are discussed for decades already as well. We are here on the Kundra Pass. This is the border between Hunza and China, where there's a new gate of China has been erected, which is a very safely controlled area, and that is not so easy to enter China from this side at all. And it has been closed for more than 2 years because of Corona and COVID. But it is controlled severely as well because China is fearing some infiltration from Pakistan, Muslim infiltration from Pakistan, that is promoting the 3 curses, as it is called in China: terrorism, extremism, and separatism. And that has very much to do with the situation that we all know about in Xinjiang province of China. And so there is a very awkward situation, constellation here. On the one hand, opening up this area for trade and investments, and on the other hand, a very great suspicion against the people who come into the area. But why is this happening in an area? We have here the 4th phase of rebuilding the Karakoram highway. The first road was built in the 1950s up to the 1970s. Then in 1986, it was rebuilt again. Then in the late 90s, it was rebuilt again. And now it is rebuilt with investments that are more in the style of a Swiss mountain road. And it is a huge investment in the area that is basically not that much profitable as an area there. And the people who live there ask themselves, is this a game changer for Baltistan? Some articles in the Pakistani press were labeled, is this a game changer for Pakistan? And what is happening here? Who benefits from this China-Pakistan economic corridor? We have a dry port in the Hunza Valley where Chinese container trucks are unloaded and the goods are reloaded to Pakistani trucks. That is the exchange place, basically, as both trucks are not allowed to go in each other's country there. And so it is basically a thoroughfare for goods between Xinjiang and the Punjab in downcountry Pakistan. The transit corridor has very little impact on local jobs here, but the pressure on land property has been increased for outside investors. This kind of dry port was started as a joint effort between Chinese trading companies and local trading cooperatives. But now in Pakistan has been taken over by the NLC, the National Logistics Cell, which belongs to the government of Pakistan in Islamabad. And so the participation and the share of local people has diminished quite a bit in this area. And when we look at the survey that was made some years ago by the Aga Khan Rural Support Program, an NGO operating in rural development in this area, the report was called Horizons of CPEC. What do people expect from these kind of activities and what is their share in it? And there was a long list, and I've shortened this list already, which has to do with some kind of education, which has to do with community participation, which has to do with labor and business aspects, but it has to do a lot with legislation and peace and the maintenance of identity, basic rights, proper political representation, legislation, but as well as preservation of cultural heritage, economic development, sustainability, payment for environmental services. So we have the whole kind of spectrum of expectations people can have in an area, and they live in an area where they are disenfranchised, where they are not participating in national elections, and where certain constellations are prevalent. I will only address in the final part of my talk 5 aspects of it. Community ownership. These mountain principalities and mountain districts had a right constellation here that only local people were eligible to buy land and to sell land here. If somebody had to sell some land, he had to offer it first to his relatives and then to other members of the village community, but it was not permitted to sell lands to outsiders. These kind of regulations have completely changed due to the CPEC and due to the recent developments here. Local labor, the main contractors are from outside. The skilled labor is often from China and from downcountry Pakistan. There are little employment effects for the people in the area. Proper political representation, the promised provincial status has not been given yet. Economic development, the CPEC projects have come to a standstill under the Imran Khan government, and not much has been done in recent years. And sustainable, the impact of global warming is detrimentally felt. These 5 aspects I want to show to you in few pictures from the area. When you look at this picture, it's not a very nice picture, I guess. You see on the left side a very small and tiny bungalow. This tiny bungalow was built in British colonial times to receive the representatives of the colonial administration, and that was the beginning of tourism in this area. Foreign visitors were hosted in this place. Next to it is the palace of the last ruler of Hunza, in which his son is living now. This son built this hotel on the right side, which was built on loans he could not fulfill or pay back, and so it was sold in between or rented in between to a Chinese road building company, and now it is under charge of a retired army officer who is operating this hotel there. And on the bottom we see a hotel by the Aga Khan Foundation that was initially built by the Pakistan International Airline PIA. So we have here a constellation of tourism. Tourism is thriving in this area. We have enormous boost in this area for the last decade, which is an effect of improved road conditions as well. And we have some outside investors and owners of hotels that were never known there before. In certain occasions, when there are public functions, when there are weddings and so on, the son of the last ruler and the son of the last vizier, who was the prime minister, they are leading the dances and they are the most respected persons. But at the same time, they have lost economic influence quite significantly, as outside investors and other affluent people are very prominent in this society. And we had 5 years ago the occasion that it happened that this is the so-called Palace of Hunza, that this palace was to be sold by the son of the last ruler's son to the biggest property tycoon of Pakistan, who wanted to use it as a guest house. He wanted to sell it even at a time when he did not have inherited it. And so this business came not into function, but the person who was living here could not help himself, and he invited all the elders from the community and said, what shall I do? My own son want to kick me out of my own palace. But this palace is property of the community here. This belongs to you, to the people. And the people and the elders, they said, yeah, if it belongs to us, please give it to us in writing and hand it over to us. And that has not happened yet so far. But this example shows only that every property is on the market, basically, and can be sold. The next project is one of the biggest hotel groups wants to build this kind of hotel in one of the most unstable areas where in 2010 a landslide created this lake, and where the Karakoram highway had to be rebuilt, and is able to acquire land and acquire property to do these kind of projects, as we have here a tourism boom that has attracted so many investors to come to this area. There is some resistance by people. There is the Awami Workers' Party. Their candidate was even campaigning from jail. Now he's out of jail and is quite active there. But the mainstream politics do different things. The infrastructure projects we have here are continuing. More roads are being built over the heads and over the mosques of the people, and the road access is improved, and that is one thing why so many people can visit this area. We had more than 1 million every year for the last 3-4 years in the area, and in former times it was hardly 30,000 per year that were coming into this area. The Karakoram highway is supposedly opened since the 1st of April this year, again after 2.5 years of closure, but it's only open for goods, not for people to travel across. And so that is one of the important economic affairs in exchange across this road. And people have, the trading communities at least, have quite great expectations that the trade can be resumed. But with the lockdowns in China, it is not very much likely that it has a major impact in the near future now. And then this year was many activists said on 23rd of March, we will get the constitutional province of Gilgit-Baltistan. The report, the transition plan, was designed and was circulated. A big group of bureaucrats and administrators and ministers was appointed to enable the transition of Gilgit-Baltistan into a province. And then it happened that in the parliament in Islamabad, a no confidence motion against Imran Khan was labeled. This plan was postponed again. No constitutional status for Gilgit-Baltistan yet in the area. And then it happened last week, it's about 10 days ago, that one of the symbols of the Karakoram highway, the major bridge the Hassanabad Bridge totally collapsed. There's a movie on the Guardian website. You can see how this bridge is collapsing and interrupted at the bottleneck position, the Karakoram highway, the lifeline of the northern areas, northern Pakistan at all. This is a quite a symbolic happening after a heat wave in Pakistan, after a huge melting of water, where the flood increased by 40% and destroyed this building, which was there since the 1970s completely. So when we look at the valley from a distance, it looks very peaceful and calm, and everything seems to be in order. But coming to a close, let me say the opening up and pacification were instruments of spatial appropriation and establishing exchange relations since the beginning of colonial penetration. They have been game changers for the region loaded with expectation and a number of promises. The recent CPEC-related interventions of a different dimension. These actions have not only affected global trade conditions, they enhance bi- and multilateral cooperation. By being an integral part of a Eurasian network of trade corridors and infrastructure lines of communication, One Belt, One Road and CPEC have initiated a kind of a gold rush intervention in the Karakoram, led by powerful and financially potent investors that have deprived local communities from controlling their own resources and increased all kinds of dependencies. Some people think this is a dangerous kind of game changer for Gilgit-Baltistan. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Herman.
Thank you very much, Herman. That was really fascinating. I have to say, it's not a topic that I know very much about, so I feel like I've learned so much by listening to that. I really appreciated all the photographs as well. For somebody who isn't familiar with the area, it gave me a very vivid image of the area that we were talking about. But as I was listening, I was thinking about Nigeria. I visit Nigeria quite often. And again, we see China carrying out very similar kinds of enormous building projects in Africa, in Nigeria, for example, where they bring in most of their own workers, they set up their own kind of dormitories, they provide all their own food. So they actually, the benefits to the local economy have to be questioned, and a lot of the activities and the projects are extraction orientated. So we're really seeing a sort of new, not new, but kind of a different form of colonialism led by China around the world. We know this is happening in many, many places around the world, and perhaps we in the West are not speaking about it as much as we should be doing, but it's clearly very fascinating. And the point that really stood out for me is when you talked about this huge financial loan that has to be paid back, and questioning, you know, what are the implications of that for Pakistan economically, politically, but also in terms of security, if there is this massive pressure to pay back such a huge loan. So really, really interesting, and with ramifications for many other places around the world. So thank you very much for that, Herman. I'd now like to open the floor for questions. So if I can just remind colleagues to please keep your microphone on mute, because we get a lot of interference. So if people have a question, perhaps they'd like to put their hand up or type their question in the chat. There aren't any questions in the chat at the moment. So if anybody has a burning question and they would like to put their hand up, you're very welcome to do so. Otherwise, I can invite Antia. Oh, yes, we've got a hand. We've got a hand up.
Shall I? Okay.
Yes, so the first hand is Erdi. Erdi, over to you.
Thank you, Liz. Many thanks, Professor Herman. Likewise, Liz, I've been like quite, I don't have that much logic about the region, and it was a fascinating and enlightening presentation. Thank you so much. My question is whether it's relevant or not. I wonder whether there is any other external actors have been playing an important or a significant role or creating another alternative economic corridors to establish an impact on the region. As a person who has been scrutinizing in issues about Turkey, I know Turkey has been trying to create some economic links to be an influential actor in the region, but I have no idea about EU or Russia or other actors. Can you give some like additional information? They are most probably additional to your presentation, but I just wondered this international rivalry conflict, whether that's valid or not in the region. Thank you so much for the presentation again.
Yeah, that's a very important question. In Pakistan, we have, of course, different actors that are investing and doing commercial projects. But in the northern part of Gilgit-Baltistan, to name the region like that, we have differences in, say, kind of infrastructure development. Infrastructure development is basically done by two actors. The one actor is the Chinese government, or the Bridge and Road Development Corporation, as it is called, and the other actor is the Frontier Works Organization, and that is a civil kind of road building company belonging to the Pakistan Army. It's not an international actor, it's a national actor there. But they basically control all the kind of infrastructure development there. They building the roads, the high dams, and the hydroelectrical power plants. But in the hydroelectrical power plant development, there are some other international, multinational companies involved as well, contributing turbines and so on, and other kind of appliances that are required there. But if you look a little bit broader, if you look at the field of education, for example, we have and rural development, and we see not that directly related to CPEC development, then we see that we have quite some international NGOs active in these areas. The Aga Khan Foundation is one of the very prominent actors here in different fields, from health to education to conservation to road to building and rural development and so on. We have other kind of Arab investors in educational institutions here, and we have other international actors who communicate through other NGOs or government organizations in the area. But the big business, when you're referring to the big business, then we have in the northern parts of Pakistan, mainly China as the only international actor.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for your question, Erdi. I can see that Natasha also has her hand up. Natasha?
Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
I hear you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Professor Herman Kreutzmann. This was really interesting. As somebody who kind of works on the other side of the Himalayas, you know, Bhutan and Kashmir, it's just striking to see the different modalities of colonial exercise of power, you know, economic and political, both in these areas. So I truly appreciate kind of the longer historical background. I just wanted to ask you a little bit more about the electoral scene. So you mentioned that the Awami Workers' Party, but if you could say a little bit more about the dynamics of the electoral scene, basically, and how the present situation post the situation in Parliament and Imran Khan, how that's taking shape right now in the region, based on what you know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for your question. It's a really interesting constellation that we have in Pakistan. We have a constitution that is not covering the whole area, which is governed and administrated by the government of Pakistan. So we have an awkward situation. We have the 4 provinces which are part of the constitution and which are directly and with the provincial assemblies, and who have members in the Senate and in the parliament there, which is a normal, say, to speak, kind of a constitution. And then we have certain reservations for other areas in Pakistan. We had for a long time, we had these tribal areas on the border to Afghanistan, and these Fatah federal administrated tribal areas have now been incorporated into the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. They are called now newly merged districts. since few years. And then we have the complicated constellation you probably are referring to, that is Azad Kashmir, with an own parliament, with an own president, with an own prime minister. And we have the different situation in Gilgit-Baltistan, a situation where we have a regional parliament, but we have the prime minister who is controlling basically all kind of legislation that is taking place. In Gilgit-Baltistan, we have a parliament of 24 members there, and all the different parties that are competing in other parts of Pakistan are more or less represented there, and some independent candidates and some reserved seats for women and technocrats in that parliament. So it's a situation that has limitations here. The limitations are that the regional parliament cannot make its own decisions to the final end, that it has only limited financial power and other powers there. And it is because of this kind of liminal state of this region of Baltistan that many things I was referring to today can happen here. Potential and powerful and potent investors can do many things in an area where the constitutional status is in a liminal state, and where different legislation does not apply, that is applied in other parts of the country. So we have different kind of spatial organization of constitutional rights and not rights as well. But the Gilgit-Baltistan people are disenfranchised from national elections in Pakistan. They are exempted from taxes as well that are collected on the national level. So there are some different rules and regulations that apply for this. And there's the Ministry of Kashmir Affairs that is controlling most of the affairs that are taking place in Gilgit-Baltistan.
Thank you very much, Herman, and thank you, Natasha, for your question. I can see that there's also a question typed in the chat. Herman, I don't know if you can see that. It's quite a long question. So I'm just wondering if I could invite the poser of the question to maybe turn their microphone on and ask the question in person. If you've got the functionality to turn your microphone on. So is that Gias Pierre? Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. If you're not able to turn your microphone on, I can read out the question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So, sorry, I just asked three because there were so many things that were just coming that were provoking different questions, but you can choose to answer any of them. So one thing that sort of, from the bridge photograph you recently showed, I thought it was the first time that the environmental issue had become part of this, whereas a lot of material that has been read has been on, mainstream and particularly macroeconomic benefits. So I wanted to ask, like, why hasn't the environmental impact of the CPEC become part of mainstream discourse? The other thing that I generally wanted to ask, and this is an interest of mine as well, I was looking into the impact of the CPEC, particularly in reference to pastoral communities. So based on your work as well, which I've gone through over the past few years, do you think, how could some particular pastoral communities be affected by the road, perhaps even worse than others? And are there any that come to your mind? So yeah, these two.
Yes, let's come first. Why the environmental issue or the environmental topic is not part of CPEC. The environmental impact is part of the CPEC projects when it comes, for example, to road building and to dam construction and so on. But because many of those roads that have been constructed have had to be rebuilt several times. And the Karakoram highway had to be rebuilt after the January 4 major landslide in Atabad, which caused this lake of several kilometers length that had interrupted 25 kilometers of this road. And China built 5 new tunnels, so-called Pakistan-China friendship tunnels, to bypass this kind of obstacle. They are part of the CPEC, say in individual projects, but not as a strategy to work on this. The only strategy that is devoted to ecology is the strategy of national parks, transboundary national parks. That is as a part of it. And but these existed, honestly speaking, already before CPEC started. And this kind of cooperation is part of an initiative that is called Pamir Peace Park to combine Afghanistan, Tajikistan, China, and Pakistan in an area, and that has been advocated for many years, and is only, say, listed in the CPEC documents, but not is not a special activity there. The second question you asked about the pastoral communities. Well, pastoral communities, we have to distinguish between different kind of pastoralists in this area. We have the local communities who are living in settled villages and drive their animals into the high pastures close to the glaciers on a seasonal basis. We see everywhere in this area a decline of this kind of form of pastoralism, as there is no man and women power to be engaged in these 3 to 5 months of activities in the high mountains. And in certain communities, people try to overcome this by hiring shepherds from other areas of Pakistan, which are poorer than this area, and to engage them. But overall, we see quite a decline. But then we have some mobile pastoralists who come from downcountry Pakistan all the way up to the valleys into the Himalayas on a long journey normally, and these are severely impacted by all these developments, and their accessible pastures are shrinking, and their rights to stay overnight with the herds in certain locations is becoming more and more complicated, and they are more or less excluded. So pastoralism is, if you look at it from an ecological point of view, 50% of the surface of these mountain areas is basically pasture. But it is not the prominent activity nowadays in the area, and only easily accessible pastures are utilized at the moment, and many are excluded.
Thank you very much, Herman. There is another question in the chat which also relates to environmental issues from Richard Hughes. Richard, we can read the question, or if you would prefer to turn your microphone on and ask your question in person, you're welcome to do that.
Hello, Herman, Richard here.
Hi.
I just thought it would be worthwhile saying something about the earthquake side of the valley, or the northern areas, because it isn't just a flood-prone area because of glacial outburst floods and so on, but it is an earthquake territory, and in a location where there is very little control over building, and I suspect over the major infrastructure projects funded by China and Pakistan government. So I think it may be worthwhile saying a little bit more about that, because it is another constraint on rural development and these international projects.
Oh yes, we have. Richard knows better than I do, in fact, about the earthquake-prone areas here, as he was involved in earthquake-safe kind of construction in the area as well. No, we are here in a very active zone of earthquakes, of causing landslides, causing all kinds of avalanches, all kinds of destruction, and we have quite endangered areas. And this area was not affected like Azad Kashmir was in 2005 when there was this major earthquake, but regularly we have earthquakes in this area, and they are triggering off mass mobilization that is destroying not only infrastructure but habitations and agricultural lands as well. We do not see that much of an integration of these knowledge, the geotechnical knowledge into the planning of certain areas and certain projects there as well. We know very well how many times this road had to be repaired in different locations, although it was quite well known what can happen in the area. And it is quite a big challenge, and in certain developments should not take place because of the endangered situation in which certain locations are in this area. So it is a question of neglect, I would say. And if you put this in the same context of climate change and global warming, more events can be triggered off nowadays when permafrost is shrinking, when mountain slopes are destabilizing to a much higher degree, and that a smaller earthquake can trigger off quite some mass movements that were unexperienced in this area before. So the danger is growing basically through global warming, and a combination of all these factors is quite severe.
And do you think that the vulnerability of communities is increasing because the population growth means that people are progressively moving on to marginal land, which in the past, through a kind of a Darwinistic understanding, the land was avoided, and now pressure of expansion of settlements means that vulnerability of local communities are increasing, which to me is more of a concern and an interest than damage to the KKH.
That's true. Yeah, of course, we have recorded all the events we could find in archival files and newspapers and so on for more than 150 years about events that have affected settlement places. And it was quite surprising that the old settlement places were quite safe, basically, and that we have very few settlements during the 19th century and early 20th century that were affected by destruction and had to be given up as a settlement place. There were, of course, some events that have destroyed single houses and so on, but not that much. But what we see now is a kind of a gold rush movement in Gilgit-Baltistan, where not only investors from outside claim lands and buy lands where they want to make constructions of hotels and restaurants and other kind of tourism-related investments, but where the affluent people from the area are all building houses in the most valuable agricultural lands and in the endangered lands, as you mentioned there. In some places, not many people are living permanently. That is one thing, because they build this for the future, basically, when they do these kind of investments. But you're completely right. This is a movement in increasingly more dangerous locations where houses are built, because they are supposed to be close to existing villages, and these existing villages are surrounded by very dangerous locations there. And this is a process that is continuing, and I don't see that many people would avoid this. We have the case along the Karakoram highway, a hotel of, I don't know, more than 100 rooms was built by an outside investor just opposite of a landslide and rockfall prone slope. And every local person would know that one should not build a house there. But this was sold to that person, and he built that hotel. Until now, it is still there, but I don't know for how long it might be there. So there's no regulatory institution that would design areas that can be used for settlement and would be safe for settlement. And that is part of that liminal state of affairs as well in Gilgit-Baltistan, that many things can happen that would not happen in other parts of the country.
Thank you very much, Richard. That was a really fascinating exchange there between two people who clearly know a lot about the dangers in this area, and it's just fascinating to think of what, well, it's terrifying actually to think about what might happen with people moving into such an unstable area. Really, really interesting. So I just don't see any other questions at the moment, and I wonder if Antia would like to come in at this point and ask a question or contribute to the
Yes, of
discussion.
course, I would like to. Yeah, because I was thinking about along the lines that Natasha talked before. I mean, in the beginning of your talk, you are talking about lines, and lines seem to be a little bit benign, you know, something not really important. But why lines have such a deep effects in these regions? And why do lines are having this? Why lines have such a deep effects in these regions? Because I'm thinking about other lines, such as the line of control, and it comes to my mind also a presentation by Hafiz Jamali on the water port years ago, which was he reached the same conclusions as you are. I mean, as you are reaching now, you are telling us now today. So what is development? I mean, what is development meant for? I mean, for whom? Who benefits from development? If I think about, in the case of Gilgit-Baltistan, this region seems to, I mean, the CPAC seems to connect, but also disconnects, and it doesn't connect at all the region. It doesn't have any major change for Baltistan. I mean, for example. So I was wondering about, how do you see these discourses about development in this region? Also the space, which is disappearing. I mean, can we continue to talk about this region in the future? Or will we talk about something else? Yeah.
No, what we experience here, I would say, is the a rather eye-opening expression of how modernization theory has inspired development projects. And China is probably the most pragmatic and most concerned follower of modernization theory in its regional planning and development projects. But all these roads are lines, but they are similar in effect what is irrigation for agricultural development, basically. Irrigation and water use is the development advisor's prime project for increasing production in agriculture. And if you transfer this in the infrastructure sector, then roads are the promoters of kind of a development. Robert Chambers from Sussex, he once said, development and research take only place along roads. And said researchers are lazy and development experts are lazy as well, and they go only to areas where they can go with a white Jeep and vehicle there. And the road is a precondition in a certain kind of a development model, and that this development model has not necessarily anything to do with what is needed in a locality, because all these projects come from outside. They are introduced from outsiders, and they are connecting from an outside area and are not necessarily looking at the conditions of a location at all. Of course, it must be needed in certain circumstances to have a road access, to have the opportunity for migration, for mobility, and so on. But if the control of the resources is getting out of the hands of the people, and if they are not participating in decision making, then it is quite a different affair that is taking place. When the first rural development activities in the 1980s were initiated by the Aga Khan Foundation, they made a bottom-up approach in asking village communities what kind of development they wanted, and road was not the prime interest of the of the people to get into there. They wanted land development, irrigation, and investment in pastoral practices and so on. So that is I would say we have to interpret these kind of developments in the form of modernization efforts, and these modernization efforts are not necessarily something that is decreasing dependencies from outside. And that is, I think, what is taking place here, that people lose control of their own assets, and these assets are not that great that they have had there, and then they cannot say participate in decision making what is going on. And so I think they are more deprived now than ever before in being participating in these things. If I would talk about the other lines, about the borderline, that would be, I think, a completely different talk, and I think that we have to postpone a little bit from now.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for that question, NT, and thank you for your answer, Herman. Oh, I think we've got a hand up. I have to go into another. Is that a new hand, Natasha, or is that an old hand, as they say?
It is a new hand.
Oh, it is a new hand. Over to you,
yes.
Natasha.
Yeah, because if nobody else has a question, I'll just ask a few others. So yeah, I mean, I'm just taking up the discussion right now. Are there, I mean, the building of these roads, the maintenance of these roads, you said these are people who are coming from outside the region. Do the locals ever get involved in the processes, the physical processes of making or repairing or anything? Like, is there a direct connection that the locals have at all with the roads, other than as a transit thing that, you know, that they move on? That. And secondly, are there ever roadblocks? Does anyone ever protest? Do the roads ever become symbols of disruption rather than of you know, mobility and movement? Yeah, so I'm just basically trying to get at the the political, cultural, social, you know, thing, the stuff surrounding the roads as roads on and what they are supposed to be doing. Do they ever sort of you know, do anything other than what roads are supposed to be doing? Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. When the Karakoram Highway started in the late 1950s to be built, there were different approaches tried out. First of all, it was given to the Pakistan Army to do it, and they had not sufficient workforce, so they tried to employ prisoners, and that did not work at all. Not because of their running away, but because of the skills as well. And then later on it became a joint effort of the Pakistan Army and the Chinese authorities. Basically, major sections were built by the Chinese engineers and the Chinese engineer corps. But if you look in the internet, you can find a nice movie on the Karakoram Highway made by the Pakistan Army, and you get the impression that only Pakistan Army has built the road on its own there. But we have then certain other kind of link roads that are connecting, that were built by other people, that were built by village communities who wanted a link road for a tractor that could link to that major road, and so on. Road maintenance on the major arteries like the Karakoram Highway is an affair by Army Engineer Corps there. So that is not a direct local employment there, although many people from there are working in Army undertakings, but not necessarily here locally, so on. And you were asking about interruptions. There are many interruptions, not only environmentally triggered interruptions are there. To block the Karakoram Highway is quite a regular affair when certain political demands are promoted. And one of the prominent affairs was in the 1990s when women and children were squatting on the Karakoram Highway close to the Chinese customs post where the Kun National Park is there, and were demonstrating and demanding that the village communities would get a share from the proceeds of the national park, from the trophy hunting and so on, from these areas, as they were deprived of their traditional grazing rights for their flocks in this area. So that was a longish affair, and it went for months, and negotiation went for years, and it resulted in a kind of a sharing of proceeds between the village communities. There's a Kunjara village organization that receives shares nowadays. Then we have sometimes blockages when there are so-called sectarian clashes, when there are Shia and Sunni communities are having certain celebrations there, and when the road is sometimes blocked. But there were blockages as well lower down on the road after some people were kidnapped and hijacked and killed by attackers on the road, and then for some time the road was blocked as well until the government had to admit what had happened and had to suggest what kind of improvements would be coming to the area. For certain periods, sometimes people have to travel in escorts on the road, when dacoits, when street robbers are feared to attack this. So that is it's not a calm road, so to speak, in many respects, and many things can happen, and the road is a very important field to display political demands and display activities.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Natasha. So we're sort of coming towards the end of the session now. So can I just check if there are any other final questions, comments? So maybe I can just hand back to you now, Herman, to kind of in the remaining moments, if there's any kind of final wrapping up that you would wish to do.
Well, not necessarily. I think I thank you that you have invited me to talk about this, probably for many very remote kind of topic. But I think we could have a similar talk on other parts of this network of roads that is a kind of a Eurasian network, so to speak, that is covering many countries, and we have experiences in other countries like in Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan as well, how these investments from outside that are serving a global kind of interest of exchange relations have effects on the ground that are normally not discussed at all, and where the people are never involved in any kind of decision making. That's why I brought this example from the Second World War. The road was planned for several years, but nobody in the valley I've ever met had ever heard about it. So it was really on top, over the heads of any people there, that this kind of planning is done. And this kind of planning is somehow integral part of the One Belt and One Road project as well, because that is done in downcountry Pakistan and in China, and not in communication with the people. And that was why the people had this kind of a workshop to articulate their demands and promote their demands and publish their demands as well, but not that much has changed in the meantime. So I think we should always be alert to see the broader picture, who is missing out in such a great project, which has fancy titles like Silk Road, sounds very nicely, but it's not that harmless as it might sound.
Yes, absolutely. And as we've said earlier, this is happening in many places around the world, in addition to the area that you've been speaking about today. So thank you very much to yourself, Professor Herman Kreutzmann, for your wonderful presentation. I've learned so much. I always enjoy it when it's a topic I don't know anything about, and I learn lots of new things. So thank you very much for that, and thank you very much to our colleague Antia for suggesting today's seminar and for liaising with yourself and inviting you to be our guest speaker today. So on behalf of my colleague, Dr. Maria Lopez, and myself, I'd like to thank everybody for attending, and also our colleague Oliver, who supported us earlier. So maybe we can now stop the recording, or the recording will just stop when we